review.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen Swaby is going to quickly run through this. It's a bit of work that I had the team do ahead of the LTP to check in on our monitoring networks for fitness for purpose, and also recognising that we were moving into a new era of working. It allowed us to kind of look at what we were doing and to make sure that we had all the bases covered. So Stephen will step you through that work and the findings.
Thanks, Ian. Through you, Mr. Chair, I've provided you with a 2.5-page report which summarises the sorts of things that we've been doing, and I'll just briefly take you through it verbally. I don't propose to provide a presentation. There's only so many photographs of telemated networks that you can bore people with. You probably realise as a committee that the environmental monitoring that we do in science is fairly broad in its remit. It covers 6 major domains that we work in, from air and climate, including air quality and weather, through surface water quantity and quality, into groundwater quantity and quality, land science, and the coastal domain, particularly looking at ecology in that area, and also in surface and groundwater. To do that, we have a range of different networks, some of which are telemated observational instruments that sit in the field and take measurements of things. So that can be things like water level in rivers or in groundwater. It can be quality, so we have some ongoing monitoring for quality, such as conductivity and pH. It can be collecting objects, so some of the air quality monitoring sucks particles out of the air and measures how many of them there are. And it can be something that's a little bit more involved, so involves scientists particularly getting into the field and observing things directly. So, for example, counting bugs, measuring fish, and so on. Now, those networks are specifically for our state of the environment monitoring, which is something that we're mandated to do under Section 35 of the Resource Management Act. But those networks also provide data for other parts of Council's operations. So, for example, much of the work that's done in the rivers is particularly designed to help the engineers understand the performance of the drainage networks and the flood management networks. And during civil defence emergencies, that information becomes quite critical. For resource consenting and compliance matters, measuring low flows in rivers is also key. And some of the work that we do crosses over into the open spaces domain and into land management, particularly in the land science area. So the exercise we've been through recently is to try and understand whether or not these networks are really fit for purpose still. And the consultant has been out and talked to a wide range of the people with whom we work, stakeholders and various sectors, and talked internally widely with those people in the regional council who use our data. They've thought about the objectives that we have both under our regional policy statement and plan, and some of the measures that we're seeking to undertake as part of the long-term plans, and tried to identify some of the likely scenarios for change in the future that might change the way in which we do our monitoring in the wild. So rather than take you through every single specific recommendation, I've provided some of the key general conclusions in para 13 and some specific things which are quite interesting in 14. The general conclusions are that we need to be thinking more about where our strategic goals are and how we align our environmental monitoring networks with those. And particularly thinking about integrated catchment management, which is a proposal in front of us as part of the draft LTP, which will change perhaps the way in which we monitor some of those catchments if we focus more on the integrated nature of that work. Equally, we're doing more work with Maori. We have more demand for Mataranga Maori monitoring, and this is a challenge that's meeting quite a number of the regional councils around New Zealand. And there is, for example, an EnviroLink initiative being discussed at the moment, which would be a funded piece of work of research to establish what a Mataranga Maori monitoring network looks like. What is it you monitor? Why? What sort of information do you have, and how do you respond to it? And equally, citizen science is a key component of new initiatives in monitoring in New Zealand. And it's something that is part of what we're thinking about in the tank proposed plan change, because the collaborative nature of that plan change has stimulated significant interest in various community groups and stakeholder groups to be involved in doing their own monitoring. We provide a lot of our data up from our monitoring networks onto our website. A lot of that is presented in graphs and tables, but for some people that's not enough, and they seek to get access to that data from the back end of our databases, like piping into the databases through the internet. And that's something we're developing at the moment, and it's a recommendation of the report, but we're already doing that. We intend to expose as much of our environmental monitoring data as we can for people to take from our systems without having to ask specifically for it, which will improve the flow of information. A general recommendation was made by the consultants that we think about how we use data collected as part of the compliance monitoring that goes on resource consents. So very often that data can include information that could be thought about in the understanding of that particular domain. A great example of that is monitoring of groundwater levels by people who have consented bores. They need to know what the level is so they know what their effect is being on their water take, whether they can still get access to water. And for us, that tells us something about the way in which the aquifer is behaving. And not all of that data is useful, and not all of it comes in appropriate formats. And one of the comments from the consultants was that we need to think carefully about how we do that in the future to make the data more useful. We've already shifted to doing annual report cards for our State of the Environment monitoring reporting, which makes the information more accessible to the general community. If we're using long-winded reports to try and communicate complex information and it loses people and they don't engage with the information, then it's not having the benefit that it's expected to have. And the annual report cards have been received favourably. I hope some of you have had a look at some of the ones we've put out recently. We're also looking at how plan effectiveness reporting might be updated to better align the plan that's developed with the monitoring program that results from the plan and the feedback loop that comes into changing the plan in the future. And this is something which is likely to come to the fore in the tank plan, proposed plan change. If there's a strong feedback loop between your monitoring of what's going on and how you deal with things as a consequence, then having a good environmental monitoring network is critical. At the moment, we just deal with environment to a large degree. It doesn't include social, economic and cultural aspects of the domains in which we work. And the consultants suggested that we think about how we deal with monitoring those particular domains, because under Section 5 of the Act, we do have a responsibility to think about those elements. And it's important when we start considering how future plan changes might affect those matters. If we don't have baseline data that's of use, it's difficult to track how we're proceeding against it. And kind of last but not least, there's some discussion within the report about the way in which we interact with others outside our own organisation, particularly looking at networks that others run that duplicate or overlap with our own. And the example there would be, for example, NIWA's use of climate stations and our own use of climate stations, and ditto with water monitoring, so particularly for river flows where there's an overlap between the NIWA system and our own. And over the last few years we've been rationalising those duplications, but there are more opportunities for joint approaches in that sort of space. And equally externally, to be thinking about the way in which others may wish our networks to provide information for them. So to be less insular about our thinking and the way in which we develop our monitoring networks, and spending more time engaged with others in thinking about how what they're interested in looking at might be accommodated within the networks we develop or in new networks that we put together. So I don't propose to go through 14, which is a whole range of very specific conclusions, but I am quite happy to take questions on that or other matters that the report covers.
Questions? Peter?
You didn't tell us who did the report, who was a consultant you
Sapir.
engaged?
Sapir. They
Local company?
No, they're based in Wellington. They've done previous work for us, looking at the way in which we're organised as a group as well.
Right. And you also didn't give us any sense of whether overall they were happy with what they found, or neutral about what they found, or critical about what they found.
So they weren't being critical. They were doing a systems analysis which identifies shortcomings, areas for improvement, and areas where we're doing well. Those shortcomings, are some of which you've got here, none of which were particularly substantial. There are areas that, in looking into the future, they can see we might need to do new things, which isn't really a criticism, it's an area for an opportunity of improvement.
Finn?
Thank you, Chair. Just in regard to, I didn't bring this up as a general item because I actually would like an answer, but just wondering where, for example, something such as, and I've got a specific example, the willow aphid and its effect on our flood protection, i.e. the willows that are the hard engineering bit, if you like, or hold the hard engineering bit together. Where would that discussion fit into here? Is that a specific? I'm looking at 14.3 and 14.9 as a very tenuous link to that. But the reason I brought it up here is actually I'd like an answer, considering what this council's been through in the past with $9 million of remediation with the sawfly. The aphid is starting to become an issue in other councils, and I'm just wondering where would monitoring that be captured normally?
So it wouldn't be captured by the current
They're not
environmental
here,
monitoring networks that we have.
No.
It's more likely to be picked up, I suspect, as part of the engineering program of work in their own domain. But as you point out, 14.9 was a conclusion drawn by the consultants that we need to think about biosecurity monitoring networks more overtly than we have so far.
So, Chair, just as a follow-up, could we have a bit of an update, very next meeting or whenever, on are we alarmed by the aphid and its effect on our stockings?
I would certainly support that. I've seen other farm media accounts that there are some other regional councils that are all of a sudden looking to be potentially clobbered by expense for dealing with this issue, and there have been some fishermen who have approached me over the last few months saying this is an issue that they think is kind of, if I may use the term, burrowing its way into Hawke's Bay, and is something that would require some looking at. But
yeah, we could bring an update on that particular issue. It's something that we do monitor, and as Stephen's correctly stated, as part of our annual audits, but also quite specific audits of recent times. And I won't go through the detail in detail here at the moment, but we've just completed that, and it's certainly been a very late evidence of the particular bug and problem this year. To allay some of the, I suppose, the high level fears, is acknowledging that the response and the works that we put in place for sawfly obviously have relevance to this particular pest and the alternative species planting and the hard engineering that is there to do the real work in times of a major flood. Now, probably not quite so confident in that statement once we head into the Upper Tukatuk scheme and the absolute reliance on willows. But yeah, we can bring you a position statement on that of this last year's experience and our level of concern or otherwise.
Appreciate that.
Before I go to Debbie, so what is the internal process for something like that? If somebody calls us up and raises a red flag of that sort, you probably are first in line to say, well, yep, we're seeing some of that, or we're not, or it's overstated, or whatever. Whose task does it become to determine, okay, this is a 9 on a scale of 10, it's a 2 on a scale of 10?
Again, not one simple answer on the basis. Obviously, our primary concern is obviously the major flood control schemes and the function of willow assets in that particular area, as opposed to willows in the wider community, which then step into, I suppose, with another hat, the biosecurity elements of what do we respond to concern ourselves along with a whole range of other pests. So it comes in varying capacities, but I suppose primarily to me around tree-related issues and our major flood control schemes. So the asset managers, the asset auditors are the eyes and ears on the ground, contractors. So yeah, it can come from various corners and a little bit reliant on you guys, considering who that message should get to. And I would hope internally, certainly at the exec level, that we would understand the...
And you would be presumed to have the budget to deal with it remedially if needed.
That's a big call in respect of what our response mechanism is. At the moment it is that, which is consistent with what they're doing around the country, is that it's still a holding and waiting pattern associated with this particular bug, and the expectation it'll be like sawfly in other areas, that you have an explosive or eruptive phase for a year or two and it settles down and it's another ongoing pest that we've got. So that's the current position.
So to follow up the council, then we can get a little action item on some kind of a little. Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thanks, Chair. I get the odd educated call from one of my predecessors from around this table, and he gets a bit upset when there are helicopters doing environmental monitoring sample collections. So I'm just wondering, is there merit to that? And if so, are there any efficiencies that have been identified in this report that might negate the need for helicopter use?
Yes, so this is a particular issue in the central Tuki area, where helicopters have been used by...
Keep his clothes on.
That gives it away.
I'll pass it on directly.
Helicopters have been used by the Water Quality and Ecology team to access a variety of stream tributaries that flow into the main river, to undertake an analysis of water quality and ecology in those tributaries for a short-term project. I've pushed my team very hard to make sure that they are using their helicopters only because they are most efficient in the way of getting access to the sites, or they're negating an access safety issue. So the access tracks for that particular series of sites come from the true right over very steep country, and occasionally they've had to not go to the sites because they're too muddy to drive, and they've been told by me and or Ian that that's not allowed to use helicopters because of the feedback you've had. It does mean that if we do that, we end up with holes in our data set, which means that it's of less use when we're drawing conclusions. We're sensitive to the look that presents of having staff flying around between sites. I have pushed the water quality team quite hard to make sure that they are really thinking about what the alternatives are in the most thorough way. And the conclusion they get to is if they don't use helicopters, it's either a very long period of time of walking, several hours, which isn't an efficient use of staff time, or it's too risky to get access to the site.
I think the point was he's offered to collect the samples for you too. So.
Right, okay, well I wasn't aware of
There
that,
you
so
go.
thanks for that.
And Councillor, the briefing that James will give you just around our reshaping allows us to drive in more efficiencies in this space, because absolutely those are questions that have been put to me as well.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Steve.
Firstly, I'm deeply concerned that the sensitivity regarding helicopters means Ian and I won't get our helicopter to shoot goats in.
I found a really nice one too.
Stephen, hotspots. We have a few, and we have one that I really worry about, and that is the Fernhill dump. The well drillers tell me that there's a permeable layer there and that I shouldn't worry about it, but I worry about the Fernhill dump because it's been in my life since I was a kid, and I know what's out in that Fernhill dump. And if anything ever, I'm really conscious, and I've nagged in on this that we really monitor that we're not getting any leaching from that dump, because all we did as a community was fill it in with topsoil and plant some trees on the top. So, and it's right on our aquifer, right on the entry of our aquifer. So it was a dumb place, like a lot of dumb things our forefathers did. That was probably one of the dumbest. So I'm really conscious that we do monitor that, and I hope you have a schedule. My question is, I'm getting to a question, do we have a schedule of these type of hotspots, because I noticed you mentioned arsenic, and we had, I don't know, there was also a tantalising plant out there, and there probably were other tantalising plants where they heavily used arsenic in the past. There's probably other things that I don't know about, like an old meatworks and whatever chemicals they use. So do we have a schedule of hotspots that potentially could cause us issues?
Yes, we do. And I forget what the title is in Hail Register. So the
What's it called, a hail register?
Hail Register.
Hazardous something or other, something or other.
Could we have a look at that just to see it, make sure you got a little cut? Is it extensive?
It's
huge.
yeah,
It's
so
huge.
Yes.
that's a bit of work that Wayne's team look after now, I think. So Wayne's nodding at
Yeah,
that.
we've got we can send you a list, Rex. Good luck with that. It used to be on the website, and I think we're going to put it back up. But it's the way that it was first put together, like was going to the phone book and identifying, like an old service station. So it's a little bit ragged in some ends, and some sites are quite obvious, but some are.
It's as comprehensive.
Orchards on it, that'll help.
It's as comprehensive. As comprehensive as we can make it with the information we've got, recognising that there's a lot of historic activities that you really don't know until you find it. Your point around the closed landfill is really pertinent, and actually we've just had a little bit of work done by, was it PDP?
Yes.
Pedal Delimore Partners, to review the monitoring network that sits over that that area, and they've come back and said it's good, it's fit for purpose, so carry on doing it, because there were issues raised, not only yours but others raising concerns, and so we've had it reviewed, and they've said, yeah, that's fine, carry on with that monitoring at the level you're doing it, and because you're right, it's a huge risk for the aquifer, so we've got to have a close eye on it.
And just to be clear, this may not be your department, but is there an impermeable layer there that one of the well drillers suspects?
Sure.
It depends where you are, I think. The variability of sediments in the Haratonga Plains is substantial.
I'm talking about the dump. 'Cause that's
Yeah, so at the Roy's Hill dump, there's quite a variety of different units. I'm trying to remember back to what PDP had written and the previous reporting had written, but there are some impermeable layers in parts, and that does help us. But the way in which many of these sites are monitored is to identify what's happening up gradient and what's happening down gradient, and if there is an obvious change, whether that change is significant.
It's the only way you can
down gradient, yeah.
And so the PDP work was intended to say, well, is the monitoring you're undertaking appropriate? Or is there something else that you should be doing? And PDP concluded that what we were doing was the appropriate way to deal with it.
So you're onto it.
Yeah.
But keep reminding us about
Keep asking us the questions. Yeah.
One could almost argue that it belongs on the risk register.
Yeah, I know. It's a big risk.
It's pretty big.
Shall we stop talking about it?
It's on,
It's
it's
on
on,
the- Well, Murphy's Law says that something will happen eventually.
Oh,
it's
look,
on the risk it's right out there on the risk register, and it is an item for the Finance Audit and Risk Committee coming up shortly.
So it's your problem, Neil, thank goodness. Yeah, we'll sort it out.
Mr Chair, just a question, Stephen, in regard to 14.5 on your paper. Groundwater quantity monitoring could include telemetry for more sites, but we've had numerous representations for depth of monitoring, particularly from Mr Bayliss around that, and the outcome is that there's no significant requirement for spending, etc. Can you comment, particularly in relation to the very important work linking the aquifer system to surface water? Is there a need for greater knowledge and monitoring of the depth of the various depths of the aquifer?
There is, and that's something that we're hoping to approach with the SkyTem survey that's proposed as part of the draft LTP. So that will replace the original proposal we had for deep well drilling with a much more comprehensive geographical examination of the interface between the bottom of the aquifers and the hard rock geology that sits around them, plus the nature of the aquifer in between the surface and the basement.
I guess my question arises then, why isn't it in this report?
because the SkyTeam proposal is post-dates the report development. So we hadn't been developing or thinking about SkyTem while this consultant was doing their work. They did their work middle of last year.
And also this deals with environmental monitoring networks as part of the SOE
Not a
system
investigation.
to a large degree, and the SkyTem investigation is a specific project to identify a particular environment in the Heretaunga Plains and potentially the Tukituki too.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say, Councillor, that out of SkyTem, if we go, well, actually, it appears we've got some holes in our network because of our new knowledge and understanding of the aquifer. We'll be coming back through annual
Sure.
plans and long-term plans to try and fill that.
Yeah, my
We-
concern is that the report didn't consider that or take that into account, because we've got
Because the information doesn't exist and won't exist until, I think, year 2 of our LTP. So we don't have that information, and it wasn't available for the consultant to look at and say, well, does that change the knowledge?
When's that project scheduled for?
It's the second year of the LTP, isn't it?
Second year.
Yeah.
So 2019-20.
And is that from that funding that was set aside for deep well drilling, is it?
It's a separate line item in the science budgets for the LTP. I forget the quantum, a couple of $100,000. It's a collaboration with GNS Science for Heretaunga and Ruatani for aquifers.
But we did put aside some funding for deep well drilling or preparation thereof.
No, the process was that there was some indicative information that Stephen and the team had brought back 2 years ago, I think, Stephen, around likely costs. I think it was in the order of $8 to $10 million of costs for drilling, with a view that that would be worked up to bring into the long-term plan as an expenditure, a program of campaign of well drilling over the long-term plan and beyond. That's been replaced by the proposal to do this geophysical investigation with GNS. So we're still doing it, but as Stephen says, it's not a hole in the ground, it's a broader geophysical examination of a much, or in fact the whole aquifer.
And it's in the long-term plan
Correct.
yet too.
Yes.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Stephen, you talked about the collaboration with other agencies like NIWA doing water monitoring and the like. What sort of consideration do we give when, for example, NIWA wishes to withdraw a particular monitoring site that we've been availing the information of? Specifically talking, I had someone ring me up the other day about, and I meant to send Ian an email to ask about the monitoring site on the Mohaka. Sorry?
Glen Falls.
Wherever it is. Yeah, I got it on a bit of paper at home, but I forgot to ask. So, do we give consideration to replacing that monitoring that NIWA was doing, or?
Yeah, so over the last few years we've taken over quite a few NIWA sites directly by having them transfer to us the infrastructure that they installed, so we then own it. We usually replace the instruments that they previously had, but we use, for example, the tower, the piping structures, the ladders, whatever else they had originally installed. And then they have the benefit of the data still, because our data is freely available to everyone, but they don't have the capital maintenance that's required, and we take that on. We don't always do that, and the reason is that some of the sites that they have are of less use to us, and we feel that, for example, there might be a nearby site that we've run for a long period of time that would just be a duplication of this site. And so we'll allow NIWA to close their site and not take it over. But when we take that decision, we consider how representative our nearby site is compared to the NIWA site, and if it's not particularly representative, we might still run both sites. We might take the NIWA site over and continue with our original site.
Right. Is consideration ever given to uses other than for straight out science monitoring? Thinking more about the likes of for monitoring of river levels for safety purposes for river users and the like?
Yeah, it is. So if we're unsure as to whether people are using it and for what purpose, we'll try and go and talk to those people and find out what they are doing. If we've missed some, it's unfortunate, and it would be useful for them to get in touch with us, because we can always go back to those sites and there'll be a gap in the record, but it's something that we are able to pick up again.
Okay.
So, Council, the kind of rub in this is it costs about between $10,000 and $20,000 a year to run a site. So we can't have sites everywhere. What we're looking at in this particular situation is whether we can build what we call a synthetic record for that site. So we go further downstream and we can then project the flow for what would be a virtual site, if you like, at that location, but without having a physical flow recorder there.
Right.
Because we don't need it for flood warning or our hydrometric networks. So we're saying we don't need it. If NIWA go, they've set it up as part of their national monitoring network that they run. We don't need it. They're moving out. We wouldn't replace it because we've got other demands elsewhere. We need the money to go elsewhere. But if we can, we'll build a synthetic record which we would then put on our website for people to
So in other
look
words,
at for fishing or rafting or whatever.
So when you say synthetic, you can basically model what's going to,
Correct.
you can
Yes.
anticipate what's going to happen at another spot from what's happened at a particular spot you're monitoring.
Yeah.
If I'll email you the details of the place I'm talking about, and you can let
Yep.
me know what's the decision. Yep.
So I have two questions. On 14.1, regarding lysimeters, voice of authority that I often hear from on the various panels I sit on, Hugh Ritchie, swears by these, and usually in the context of saying, you're going to adopt a regulatory scheme that uses overseer or some other clumsy tool to tell us how much leaching is going on our land. But when I actually put one of these on my property and measure, my leaching rates are substantially lower than what overseer would say they might be. So so this is obviously a bone of contention that, you can imagine. And so if we're going to mothball these, is there something that is a better mousetrap?
Yes, there is. It's called a flux meter, and it avoids the significant capital cost that a lysimeter represents, and is accepted to be a better technology than the lysimeter.
I don't know you would know offhand, but can I assume that somebody like you would consider, okay, I'll go for that?
Yes, well, it's not me that assesses it technically, it's the land science staff particularly, but also the groundwater staff, because it crosses their domains. They have advised me, and we looked into this for a couple of years, and I pushed them very hard to say, look, if we come out of lysimeters, what happens to the concrete box that we leave in the ground?
Yeah,
Oh, well, we leave it in the ground and we can always go back. But is it a better fish that we're fishing out of the lake? And they've told me it is, and I'm comfortable with their explanation. So flux
Okay.
meters are the way to go.
On 14.4, you noted you could focus on nitrate as a key thing to be monitoring, and I know from representations from the DHB folks that they're pretty hypersensitive about what we know or the ambitiousness with which we're monitoring that. So can that be something on the step-up list?
Yes, and in fact, I think the tank process is likely to push that continuous monitoring of nitrate up the list as well. Yeah.
Are there any other comments, or can we move this?
Just one further question, Chair. Cadmium, is that in the list of things that gets this due to be monitored again? Because the last report we had out was some years ago now.
So what was the
Cadmium? Is it?
cadmium?
Yeah.
Yes, so it's part of the standard state of the environment monitoring suite for soils. The next report is due, I think, in a couple of years, but I will check and let you know if you like.
Yep. Cool.
Yep.
Thanks, Lee.
So I'm move the report.
Move the
Seconder. Mr. Bailey, would you like to comment? I would just say this, my reading of this was sort of okay, we did some expert peer review of what we're doing here. There's some incremental refinements we could make to what we're doing, but basically, this is one of those rare reports that seems to be saying all's well and we don't need any more money. Is that?
Yet.
Now, having said that, there is a pretty substantial lift in science funding in the LTP, is there not?
There is, yeah.
Yeah, so while this language says we can, no more costs here, no more costs there, that is on the back of, remind us what that science lift is?
So Chair, point 17 in the report makes the note that we anticipated some of the costs that were coming out of this. So some of the things that have flowed through the LTP anticipate additional capital expenditure around equipment.
Like your super duper radar thing, that was like a couple
Sky-
$1 million, wasn't it?
SkyTem, yep. So
Yeah.
SkyTem's in the LTP. So some things we'd kind of anticipated and said, look, we'll build it into the costs, and fortunately they've survived your machinations and they're out for consultation.
So it would be a little more accurate to say that considering approval in the LTP process of a significant further investment in science work, then we don't need to spend much more
Yes. Yeah.
At the moment.
Much more.
At the moment.
at the moment.
And if I could comment for the committee, the scientists don't just seek to go out and spend more each time. I push the teams very hard to think about efficiencies and whether we can do things in a different way which cuts costs but improves quality and make sure that we continue to get the reliable data that we've been looking for.
Cool.
We've also started a process with the financial team to only replace capital equipment when it's required, not on the replacement cycle that is nominally within the system. And that provides us with some flexibility in the way in which we deal with CapEx, which has also kept costs down. So it's something that we're acutely aware of, the expense of the science systems that we have, and something that we want to be able to stand in front of communities and say, we're doing the best for you at the lowest cost we can whilst giving you the things that you need to ask questions and get sensible answers from the scientists.
Put the motion as just to receive this report. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Passed. Thank you. We have scheduled guests at 11:30. I'm not sure.
There'll be temporary out on the board.
Could you finish whoever?
James Strobing, please.
Hello, everyone.
Take a seat, Mike.
Thank you. We've got a little presentation we'd like to plug in, if that's all right, Tom.
We'll help you do that.
Yeah. What do you want us, James? What have we got here? Hi.
Hi Mike, how are you?
Does everyone know everyone here? Shall I introduce everyone? Might be the best way to go.
Here you are.
So, I'm Mike Devonshire. I'm a trustee and chair of Te Mata Park Trust. This is Michael Bate, who's a fellow trustee, some of you may know, and Emma Buttle, who's our communications manager. We're just sorting out a comms piece right now.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom, can you just appraise us of the purpose of this group today?
This is the Environment Committee, but it's basically a committee of the whole, so you have all the councillors here.
Yep.
And we're interested in hearing what your vision is for the peak, particularly in the context of a bit of kerfuffle that is existing in the community around the matter.
Good. Okay, that's great. So we're on the
So
same.
you make a bit of a presentation, and then we'll have time for questions and
Sure.
so forth.
Great.
Do you know how long your presentation is?
It won't take long, 10 minutes or
Okay.
15 or whatever. It's just,
Well, let's go on, so let's try and
yeah, I mean, if you want to ask questions as we go, that's fine. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Why don't we give you a chance to walk through what you do?
Wonderful. Emma, are you okay? Okay, all right. All right, so we've just undertaken a strategic planning exercise for the Trust, which is, as most good, well-functioning organisations should. And this is the genus of it. So this is what we've got. Currently 99 hectares of privately owned park, rather dated numbers. We're about to undertake a survey and we'll have an ongoing annual survey program, but we suspect it's closer to 300,000 or more at the moment on an annualised basis coming in and out of the park. Okay, so what is our park? So we are privately owned, we're publicly funded. Our view is that we are the hub of the Hawke's Bay tourism network. We believe we are nationally significant, we're known nationally, and people come to Hawke's Bay and they want to come and see us. We have a wide range of user groups and we cater for local and people from outside of the region, there's no doubt. And there's a little known, many people don't understand the amount of biodiversity that we have in our park and in the surrounding area. It is a bird corridor. So again, it's a little understood feature, I suppose, of our park. So, we are the heavenly gift and the iconic feature of Hawke's Bay. This is our vision. We will always be a place of cultural, scenic, recreational, scientific and educational significance for all New Zealanders. And this is very important to us. We will sustain, enhance, protect and maintain Te Mata Park's outstanding natural features and open spaces. That's critical to us. That's our vision. Now, our objectives. We want to enhance and expand Te Mata Park, and we'll go into more detail about that later, what that actually means. We need to serve and understand our users and to meet their aspirations and expectations, and they are wide and they are varied and often confused. To do this, we must build significant resources, financial resources, to enhance, protect and sustain. It's critical to us. And let's not forget, we need to nurture an environment for all of these users, the recreational, the spiritual, the cultural, the educational. This is a public benefit. Okay. So, some of the issues we're facing is fundamentally around stewardship. So we know there's a lot of pressure, a huge amount of pressure on our region, and also and it's reflected in our park. And, you know, preservation is fundamental to us. So recent discussions obviously are around beauty, protection, and that's something that we hold very, very dear. People need to be safe or understand the risks when they come in and out of our park. We've had a tragedy recently in there, and it's highlighted to us our continuing obligations. And I suppose many of the neglected parts of our parks or focuses are around education. We are a heritage site, and we need to educate and embed values for our community. And a key part of this stewardship is communication for the community. You know, getting them to understand and reflect back to us. So that's a focus for us in terms of stewardship. And this point down here, we can't achieve any of this without collaboration. And what's apparent to us is there's a whole connectivity. It's a fundamental concept and it's a reality. And connectivity is a key focus in terms of the stewardship. It can only be achieved through collaboration. We'll go into more detail about that a bit later. So, is that going to come up?
Okay. A bit slow.
Okay, so we've got a map here. I'm hoping. Okay, we flick forward. Is that going to come up?
No, it's not there, sorry.
Okay. Quite a critical slide this, so it'd be nice if we could get that.
If you want to talk to her, I'll try and bring it up.
It's hard to talk to without it. All right.
We'll
Okay.
go this way.
Okay, this is what we've got. So tracks within the park. So we have mountain biking tracks and we have walking tracks and trails. And this really is to show, so in 100 hectares, or 99 hectares, you know, that's roughly the shape of the park here, down to Chambers Walk, or Tauranga Road. And there's quite a bit going on. There's obviously quite a lot of undulation, and there's people sort of coming in and out of the park in different points. Some are coming along the ridgeline there. There is what they call the low track, which sort of people can access. It's sort of an accepted trail. And obviously we're coming into the main car park, which is in here, where there's a whole lot of development going on at the moment. And we come in through here. There are some other potential entrant points into the park, and I'd like to talk to you about those, if we can get that.
Can you give me 2 minutes?
Yep, sure, yeah.
I don't know.
that one there.
I think it's a compatibility issues. Or
Ah, okay.
Up here. It should be in PDA.
Sorry, everyone. Best laid plans.
My apologies.
Here we go. Yep, back one. Righty-ho.
Alright.
Okay, connectivity. So, this is our park here. This bit here, that's the 99 hectares. Now, we've recently entered into an agreement to purchase 8 hectares of land here.
Excuse me, Mike. I wonder if there's a pointer.
Apart from that?
Yeah, so we
Yeah.
can see what you're showing us.
Okay. Okay, so there's a...
Is the lookout one and then
Yep, there's we'll close that. All right. What about a stick?
and then the
Loading bench, that's what we use the cursor.
I don't think there wasn't one yet.
Technology.
Put on there, yeah. Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so that area there, so this is the park here. That's the 99 hectares. So that's the viewing platform. Here's Craigie Range, so everyone get their bearings. So this land here called the Jacks Block. We've entered into an agreement to purchase that. We need to raise some money, and I'll talk to you about that later. So that's 8 hectares. That's the first time since 1927 that we will look to add to the park. It's quite an exciting development for us. Just here is the main gate car park. So there's as you are aware, there's a major development going on there, and that's really just to provide for the existing pressure, access to loos, and something to drink, some water. But this is obviously contiguous. It's right next to this car park, so it opens up a whole lot of opportunities for in here. So here is where that line there, that borderline, is the actual Tauranga Road car park entranceway. That's Chambers Walk. So that, so we're already in there, if you like. Now, we've been talking with a range of interested adjoining landowners, the councils. So this line here, now these are proposed access points, some of them. If we were to go into this situation or create these types of access ways, there's a whole lot of hoops one has to jump through, and approvals and discussions needs to be had with the landowners and various interested groups. So don't take this as it's going to happen. This is our vision for the next 100 years. So coming in from the village, there's an opportunity to come through the Tainui Reserve, and then what they call the McCarty subdivision in here, to access the outer boundary and come into the park, which is just, and there's Bruno Chambers got some land here, and there's Tauranga Station in here, but this is just below the redwoods. Now, this could be a walking and biking access point in time. This corresponds to the fact that within the park we've got a plan to actually bring another track around the back for mountain bike track in behind into here, and we could link into that. So, but what I'm saying is that there is a opportunity to bring an access, working with the landowners, into here. At the same time, the redwoods being an iconic part of the park, there's some plans for the existing landowner in here. They would like to have a raised walkway with a planted wetland to provide access into the redwoods, which is a fantastic spot and quite inaccessible for some people who aren't mobile. So that would fit in nicely. So that wouldn't be bikes or anything. It's people on less able to get around, basically. Younger and perhaps older, or maybe with some disabilities. I'm not sure, but that's part of the vision in there. What we've got in front of us, we need to take these 2 forestry blocks out, and that's a certain age. That was just planted for cash about 28 years ago. That'll just be returned. The plan is that we return that to natural grassland. In here, which adjoins the redwoods, is a bit more complex, but again, these were sort of a lot of pine plantings. There's a bit of Douglas fir. There's about 12 hectares in there. Some of it's becoming quite dangerous. So we need quite a comprehensive plan about what we're going to do there, in terms of what we've got to start with, where you want to end up. It needs to look quite good at the end. So what's our vision there? What's the natural planting that's going to go in there? And then obviously there has to be a plan to actually get rid of all of the forestry. But that's coming. That's in front of us. It's a project. Requires quite a bit of work. So anyway, there's a connectivity point here. We know at the moment that there is an access way along this ridgeline, and there's a potential in time to formalise that. I know the District Council were working on a sort of a multi-use track to go in there. My view, personally, and I think the Trust is of a view that where possible it's quite good to separate bikers and walkers, you know, it's just from a safety aspect and enjoyment, particularly when you get more and more users. But basically there's an opportunity to bring this, in what form yet to be determined, but to bring this, you know, entry point into the park through here. This is right by the water tanks, people know the park. So there's Peak House just down the road here. So obviously with people coming in, there'll be a need to possibly give them something to drink or whatever, provide access to water for them. That's a separate issue for us. There are other discussions with some interested parties about providing a further access point, so that's just basically through any Lowe's land or Black Barn development. That sort of joins the high school. There's a sort of a public sort of access way running alongside the high school there. That's just in the air at the moment. It's definitely not in the district plan, but people are talking about having an access. It would also be like a bird corridor as well, with plantings to reflect that. Let's not forget we've got a lot of bird life in our park. Again, this would be you know, bird corridor type as well. And then we know that there's been discussions around connectivity between District Council, Regional Council about extending the cycleway to here, for the regional cycleways. You know, that's probably a bit more advanced than any of these, you know, this certainly than that. And then, you know, the elephant in the room, of course, there is a track cut up the hillside sitting in there. Now, it sounds as though it may not remain, but there's been, all I can say is that I've been party to some discussions where if that's going to be retired, then people are quite keen to get access some other way on this eastern face. So I'm not saying it's going to happen here, I'm just saying this is where we're at the moment, and there is pressure to get some access along the eastern face here somehow. So the point of this slide is to say that there is connectivity currently. There are various stages, discussions going on with various groups about potentially other access points in and out of the park. And you know, who's accessing it? It's people who are on their new e-bikes. There's people who are coming, local people every day accessing it. You know, tourists coming specifically to try and get into the park and get out of it. So there's just increased demand. So anyway, can we go to the next slide? So, are we going to go back to the old? Yeah, okay. Okay, so what are our priorities? So we sort of ranked our priorities. So we need to get on with buying our land. That's our number one priority in terms of major projects. The other issue we're facing is around the summit. We've got a lot of people up and down there. We know we've got a bit of a risk between the water tanks and the very top. We've got people accessing it in buses, and people riding up there very quickly on bikes, people driving very quickly in cars. So, you know, we need to sort that one out. So it's a major project for us. We believe the connectivity of tracks is a priority for us to settling a vision and focusing on what's important and what isn't. And then this is all for this year. Getting on with our forestry plan or reforestation. So getting a specific vision about how we're going to sort out those two forestry blocks. And this is in terms of our financial viability or sustainability, being able to deliver on all our plans. We believe we need to settle a regional capital fund, if you like, probably managed by someone like Hawke's Bay Foundation, where we can get giving programs going and philanthropists may wish to contribute. So that's about the next 100 years. So in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, there could be a significant quantity of money in there, allowing us or giving us options. Okay. Okay, so what's our operational funding requirements going forward? Well, currently, we've got a really good arrangement which is under a contract with the Regional Council. We have Kerry working in there for 3 days a week. And there's no doubt we've got more than 3 days a week work for him. So we really would like him 5 days a week, full time if you like. We've also at the moment, we've got some work going on one of our tracks, Chambers Walk, with being performed by or overseen by the Regional Council and contractors, just track maintenance. So I think we're spending 15k just tidying up that track, which is probably one of the major arteries within the park, heavily used by all users who are accessing from that point. We've just got a lot of pressure on us to maintain the assets that we produce for people to a standard where they can safely enjoy things. So we think we need, on a rolling annualised program, about 30,000 a year just to keep going with that track network, just keeping it up to speed. Not adding any more tracks, just looking after what we've got, providing for users. Okay. And then there's project funding. We'll take what we can get from people, but we are going to have to go out to the market, if you like, to fund our acquisition, which is 1.3 million, basically, to acquire that block of land. And we also will need funding, not to do the initial research around the summit, but whatever we come up with, there'll be, and we have some funds allocated a little bit for the summit, but we're not quite clear what we need to do there. And then, again, we need to clarify around our connectivity of tracks. And obviously the forestry plan, I think that might actually be self-funding once we get through the process, but there'll be an initial upfront cost, and then how we determine to establish our capital fund, whether we start with a one-off donation from someone or something, and go from there. So that's it for the year.
Questions?
I just have one, just a slight correction.
All Rex?
I'm on, am I?
All right, Rex.
Yeah.
Rex
Just
Paul.
one slight correction. Craigie Range have been emphatic, never deviated. They are removing the track.
Yeah.
And they've never deviated from that.
Yeah. That's right. They don't own that land, as you know.
No.
So it'll be interesting to see how they remove it. But yeah, that's their intention. I absolutely agree. It's a very complex issue. Yeah. But you're right, Rex. They don't want to have that track there anymore.
No.
Does the trust agree with that position?
The trust agrees that something needs to be done about that track. Yeah. I mean, the trust itself, there's a lot of debate within the trust around that track, around connectivity. The trust is unified in the view that there was lack of consultation around that track. That's the number one problem, consultation.
So your website says that a solution is not yet decided on the future of the track. Are you on the same page with Craggy Range, or are you not?
Yeah, we're on the same page with Craigie Range. We want a decent solution.
No. The question Tom's trying to allude to is, do you agree with Craigie Range's decision to remove that track?
Oh, I do, yeah.
Does your trust?
Well, I'm happy to comment further.
I can also comment on the website. That article, Tom, that's on the website was actually written before all of this came about, so that was when it was undecided.
That was
But
put
the
on
article was
June 3rd after Craggy Range put out 2 press releases saying we are going to take this track down and remediate the land. So I fail to see why confusion still persists.
June. You say June, Jan, you mean?
January.
January. No, they put the press release out in December.
You said June, you meant January.
I'm sorry, December.
Well, I'm not confused. Craigie are very clear about what they want to do, and whether they can or not is a separate issue.
It's a what again?
Whether they can remove that track is a separate issue.
I do.
I'm still not sure we're getting an answer.
I
to
think
that.
Michael might have an answer though.
Me? My question is, how do you remove the track and remediate without having a long-term risk of erosion, particularly with easterly storms which come in pretty hard and hit that face?
I mean, it's not our track. I mean, that will be decided. You know, there's a process, Tom. If you want to remove it, they can't remove it. They just can't go and remove it. They have to go through a process. You know that. So that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it won't be there, but there is a commitment to have access on that eastern side after that issue is dealt with. And it appears to me that the track's going to be remediated, isn't it? That's what everyone wants in terms of the parties that are directly involved. So it's their decision, subject to the law.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I can just add a bit of clarity in terms of discussions specifically around the Craigie Range track. They're currently developing a decommissioning plan, so they have to go through a formal consenting process, which is what Mike's alluding to. So as much as there was a consenting process to put it there is a equally and probably more demanding process of actually removing the thing. So Craigie Range are currently engaged with consultants establishing a decommissioning plan that will determine and define what and how that may occur and what process needs to be gone through in terms of yet another formal consents process.
Yeah, that's right.
And Craigie Range has communicated that to various constituencies, particularly the Maori community, that has made clear its position on this. And so why are efforts being made to convince the Maori that they're wrong about this?
I don't know. Are they? People like.
My understanding?
I don't know, Tom. I mean, as far as we're concerned, we need to ensure that whole face is protected, and this sort of thing doesn't happen again, where there's absolute confusion and angst in the community, and people not being consulted. We weren't consulted. So, I mean, I think the key point for us is around stewardship of that area. I mean, what I'm most concerned about is what's going to happen next, and who's going to be the guardian of that landscape, and who's going to work with, who's going to gather the communities that should have been consulted in the first place, and actually work with them to ensure that this stuff doesn't happen again. We feel it's behoved upon us to be part of that solution.
We had Michael trying to answer a previous question as well.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little confused. My understanding from the media was that the Craigie Range had come and presented to you guys about their proposal, because so that was a different trust of some sort, the one that the councillor was it Nixon was on, where he regretfully didn't bring that forward to full council about that discussion. Is that not you guys? So I'm mistaken in that belief.
No, we don't.
That's cool. Okay, you talked a bit about being guardians of the, and again, this is in that 3rd of January report that was there. You've talked about it today about being the guardians of the peak. What tangata whenua representation have you got on the trust to ensure that you're looking at the views of the whole community?
Right now, none. We've just agreed to formally establish a mana whenua committee. So we're in the process. We've had a hui about that. So that's an issue for us to address. We've recognised that. So the next meeting will hopefully be in the next couple of weeks. And the purpose of that meeting is to start to agree the terms of reference for the mana whenua committee. And from that mana whenua committee there will be a representative. The intention is to be appointed to the trust. So
you're looking at just appointing a representative to the trust. You're not actually looking at working in partnership with mana whenua or tangata whenua. No.
There will be within our governance structure. So we're currently organised with 3 subcommittees. We're about to go to another couple, and one of them will be mana whenua, and they'll be integral, basically part of our governance structure. So effectively, if we're going to make decisions, it'll have to come of a certain type. Once to be determined by the terms of reference, it'll come to mana whenua committee, they will give back their views, which have to be considered by trust, and they'll have an appointee on the trust.
Councillor Barker.
I just want to come to a completely different subject. The piece of land that you've identified that you'd like to purchase, why do you see the trust needing to purchase itself? Why couldn't an option be for either the Hastings District Council or this council purchase it and have it be the owners of it in conjunction with the original private trust which holds Tomato Peak?
They could. Yep.
Have you put any feelers out for that?
Putting out one today.
Well, I didn't hear it. That's why I'm asking it. It just
Yes.
seemed to me that you were looking to do it yourself. And I, for one, would be a little anxious about this council putting money in to buy land, which would then be owned by a private trust. But I would be in a different position if the trust said to us, would you purchase the land and manage it conjointly with ourselves, where we would then remain the owners of the land? That would be a different question for me.
Yeah, Rick, I mean, you've nailed it precisely, because, you know, expanding the park doesn't necessarily mean that you have to own more land. And in fact, you need to be aligned, which is back to Tom's point around, you know, everyone being on the same page. So, yeah, I think that would be an elegant solution to something like this, and it's definitely in our minds. So as we go around, I mean, there's also, you know, philanthropists and things like that, but sometimes they come with conditions.
Yeah, I just thought that would such a proposal for the councils. Either we now have a piece of property which is seen as valuable to Hawke's Bay, owned by all three councils. The template has been set. I think there's another place here where we could do this again. Either two or three or one could do it. And then to manage it, you're quite right. The park's important to this region for multiple reasons. I won't go over them. And to add to it would be, I think, something worthwhile, and I'd certainly be happy to consider it. But I wouldn't be happy about giving the money away, but contributing a piece of land to it.
Yeah, I think that's...
So, with respect to the money, I mean, part of the context of this discussion is that you know, in 2015-16 there was a huge public consultation which the trust ran about the future of the park, what its strategy should be. All the various issues were addressed. Walking versus mountain biking versus this versus the next thing and so forth. And out of that came a 10-year plan that, among other things, cut a deal on trails, said 8.5 kilometers of mountain biking, and those trails were approved only on the condition that they met very rigorous landscape protection criteria, so forth and so on. And so when and our council, having previously committed funds to a different proposition, had been sitting on those funds, waiting to hear what this long-term plan would be. When we did hear what that plan was in 2016, the council agreed, great, we're happy with this, seems to have community buy-in across the board, Maori, mountain bikers, walkers, everybody seems copacetic. It's more focused on core maintenance kinds of things and some trail extension, whatever. So that's what the council has put its money and name behind. And so in that context, I'm not sure whether these priorities as they've been laid out, two questions really. One is, do you see these as consistent with what is already sitting out there as a 10-year plan, or does this depart in any way from that? I guess that's the first question really, is are we still associated with the same thing? Secondly, whether, well, all of what you're talking about really does apply to the piece of turf that the trust actually controls. I think the public perception is that there's a totality out there that is much bigger. And so when a controversy like the Craggy Range one comes along, there is a risk of this council being tainted as to whether, are we part of that, are we not part of that? Is this part of our notion of what ought to be happening? And that's why I think there's a certain, at least from some councillors here, there's a bit of concern as to what do we perceive to be investing in here, Because there were early statements that that track was built because it complemented a regional council strategy. Well, you know,
Yeah, well, I think to answer your second question first, we see, you're right, I mean, everyone says Tomato Park, oh, you're Tomato Peak. So you're all wrapped around that whole thing. So what this whole controversy has thrown up to me is that there's a lot of people thought everyone else had something under control. They didn't. A lot of
they
assumptions.
thought a deal was made.
Well, yeah, a deal was made. Like a deal was made that only a very few people knew about. But what it's threw up, what's thrown up to us is that there's a common, very very big view around that landmass that it needs to be protected. So who's probably, there should be a group of people focused on that, alongside the rules and regulations that exist. Okay, so we're probably well placed to do that, and think and be structured and organised in a way that we can't do anything in our park without a whole lot of consultation at a higher level than that track was allowed, if you like. So why shouldn't that be applied to everyone else around that landmass, if you think about it in principle? So maybe it's behoved upon us to go and actually, we are the guardians, if you like, of a fair chunk of that landmass. So why couldn't we just extend that a bit further with the right people involved? So I'd like to think that the regional council are some of the right people to be involved in that whole focus. Same with the district council. So back to your first point, I think we are still aligned. But I think what we're trying to point out here is that there's so many more pressures that have happened quite rapidly within our region, and specifically within that landmass, that we've got to be organised to a different level, and we need to work collectively. And I think that's the key point. We can't do it without you, to some extent. There's a husbandry of that park, but it's all the other vision stuff that goes wrong outside it, and we've got to include the district council as well in that conversation. And to some extent, we are, regional and district power.
So you want to play that leadership role, which is fine. I understand it's certainly appropriate, but the kumbaya that you're looking for here is at least momentarily blocked by a apparent unresolution of this track, and until there's concrete evidence from Craggy Range that they actually are going to remove and remediate, whether the councillor thinks it can be done or not, that's the decision they've made. They have a plan of action, as Graham has indicated, to do that, which hasn't been very well publicized. And in that context, if people would normally go to your website and say, well, what do you guys think about it? You're still saying it's an unresolved issue. So who wants to talk to you about this under those circumstances?
Well, quite a few people are talking to us about it. So,
and I suspect they're saying we're not going to talk about big picture or alternatives until first things first are attended to.
That's right, and no one wants to touch that thing until Craigie resolved their track issue.
They have. I'm offended by some of this. They have, and we've got to respect Craigie Range's decision. And saying that they haven't, they have. They have been really clear about this. They are going to remove that track. Now, it's the first time I've heard they didn't own the land, because I heard they had a right to the land. I know Michael's dying to get in on that and hasn't seemed to have the space. But I can assure you, and I've been a little bit involved in this, the previous landowner does not want this load of rubbish on his desk. So that track's going. Now, there will be problems. They've got to wait till the autumn, and they're going through the problem, how they're going to do it. But that track is going. Forget it from now on.
Agreed.
So,
You're quite right.
just a question, this is actually for staff, like 2 or 3 years ago, in response to the amended vision that the Trust presented to us, we committed to spend the $500,000. Question, is the $500,000 spent, or most of it spent, or some of it spent now? And is this presentation on the Trust's new intent, which is to spend $1.3 million on another parcel of land, is it the intention or is it the request that if there is money left from that $500,000, that it gets diverted to assist with the purchase of that piece of land. And what you didn't tell us was how that piece of land is going to be incorporated into the park. Because I think before I'd consider a proposition, I'd want to know the purpose of that land from the Trust's perspective and how it's going to be integrated into your vision and future.
Jens, can you answer budget-wise?
So from a staff's perspective, I can give you my understanding, acknowledging this crosses over from my predecessor Mike Addy's role into this into what is now my responsibility. But as you state, the original $500,000 was dedicated to the park building upgrade concept. That was migrated into the same sum of money, identifying about 8 component parts of the park associated with tracks and planting and establishment type works. And I had contact from the park, and forgive me in terms of Michael might be able to help with the date, but would be 8 or 9 months ago associated with, in fact, possibly 2 sections of land associated with the park, and a discussion occurred around both the redirected funding as it still sits at the moment in my eyes, and the ability to access some of that, acknowledging that the sums of money quoted for the land were substantially more than the sums that we've either got or retained based on the original $500,000. And my advice at the time was to, in fact, engage in the LTP process at hopefully the earlier or right stage to attempt to deal with this issue as promoted here as a discrete additional element of the work. So to that extent, we've paid $300,000 to the Trust last financial year, $100,000 this year and $100,000 next year is the payment of the sums of money based on broadly on the quantum of work identified in the modified schedule that still sits on the table.
So
So
there's
we've made no-
$200,000 unspent. Is that what
Sorry?
you're saying? There's $200,000 unspent at this point in time.
Effectively.
But committed to the operations of the park as opposed to this new proposition. Like, this is the question that I wanted to put to you, Mike, was if you could explain the value proposition of the Jacks block, because look, it's largely in pasture at the moment. Absolutely nice to do, wouldn't it be great? But if you had $1.5 million that you put into reforestation or into a capital fund, that would go a long way to meeting all your other obligations. And it just seems that, you know, opportunism is before you, great opportunity, but an awful lot of effort as your number one priority could go into raising money for another 8 hectares or something like that, when you've got 99 hectares that desperately need ongoing investment. So what is the value proposition of that piece of land?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's a level of investment that we've indicated that we require. So we don't need 1.3 million to reinvest into the existing 99 hectares. What we're saying is that if we get someone working 5 days a week and a commitment to 30,000 to track maintenance, we can live with that. Okay, this is a strategic opportunity. This land doesn't come along like this very often. Right next to your park. It provides an opportunity to make it more accessible to many members of the community that currently can't access it that well, and probably won't be able to access it that well in the future. People less able to get around. It also provides us, right next to that car park, and that asset that we can manage is about $1 million worth. And where it physically sits, it might allow us to redirect 1 or 2, maybe one of the biking tracks to the side to take the pressure off the Chambers Walk for the walkers. So it makes it a safer place as well. But to be fair, there's a whole bunch of work that we need to do to actually show what the opportunities are in there. I think we have to deforest and then reforest in there, or plant, probably a better way to describe it. But I mean, the fact of the matter is we're getting more and more pressure on that park, and what we've got, protecting and enhancing what we've got without destroying it and cutting it to pieces. We're not at breaking point, but it would be very good for us to have a little bit of extra land to protect it in the next, over the next 50, 60, 70 years, if you like. We're certainly not going to reduce our land holding, but what are the options there? Would it get subdivided into housing and stuff like that? Could very well do that. That's
why we need to buy it.
Yeah.
But it's below the level that you've got existing housing anyway, just on the side of the road.
Just two.
Yeah.
This land is the most important piece of land to the future of the park because we have two entrances to the park. This land is between those two entrances. One entrance will not be a proper entrance if that land gets subdivided into houses. It can be subdivided down to 1 hectare lots. It can take 3 or 4 houses easily. Members of the public will not view the park as being as iconic and as much of a taonga if they have to go past lifestyle backyards for the second entrance to the park. That's why it's important if we're to have 2 entrances, because it's adjacent to Havelock North. That is our people's side of the park where everybody comes in. In terms of the main gates entrance, this land is immediately below that entrance. 2 of the house sites are up high, just below the main gates car park. So if that land is subdivided from the main gates car park where many people go, they will see the back of 2 lifestyle house developments. So this, and also it brings the park closer to Havelock North, closer to areas of population. The park is for people. We need to make them, we need to make the park look like a park to people immediately they arrive, rather than it look like they have to slide by the back end of somebody's or several people's lifestyle developments.
Composting.
Can I just make the point here? Sorry to come back there. I started on the subject. It seems that we're backing into this, and the point I made before is: do you want to do it yourself, or do you want others to go and do it and buy the land for you? If you're thinking about asking councils, then I think you need to put together a proposal and make it, pretty clear, and then start to address all the issues that Peter and so on raised in here. And we can have a proper discussion. I feel a bit frustrated with sort of backing into this thing, so we can have a look at, if that's what you want, then you need to say, well, could you do this? And we then seriously think about it and have a formed, structured discussion. All the issues you make are absolutely right. And I, for one, am on the firmly of the view that despite all the land we've got in Hawke's Bay, we are underdone in the area of public parks and public spaces. I go to Auckland and see the magnificent parks they've got up there, Winter Home, all the rest of it. They have got fabulous parks, unbelievably good. We are, in comparison, a long way behind it. Anything we can do to improve public spaces and access, I'm a big supporter of. But we need a proposal. We need to say, well, sharpen the pencil, come and talk to us.
That's good. I think really one of our key aims for today was to get the feeling from yourselves about what we do need to do in that respect. I mean, we recognise that we've had an opportunity here. We need to do quite a bit of work to actually explain the proposition. There's no doubt about that.
Mr. Chairman, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah. There were a couple ahead of you. I'll come back to you.
Just following on from Councillor Barker, I agree. There's no regional open spaces in Wara or anywhere, so not sure I can support buying another one round Hastings, but there you go. You talk about a capital
We'll use
fund.
our money.
Capital fund. Have you got an idea what you need? I mean, I thought the Chief Executive was quite pertinent, and Councillor Bevan, what he was saying. You say you want a capital fund, you must have a figure in mind. And you must have an idea what it would be used for. Like, is it you're going to eat the capital, or you just want to set up enough money to get the interest to pay for stuff?
Yeah, exactly, the latter.
So you want a couple of mil, 3-4 mil?
Yeah, to start it, and then in time, if you get up to 20 or 30 million.
Right.
I mean, it gives you options. I mean, if you look at the great parks that operate around the world, and how they're sustained, there's different models, and that's one of them. I feel that and the Trust has discussed this. I mean, we're in the embryonic stage of that. We haven't got a fully formed plan around that. And that's why it's a project for this year, to actually come up with another proposition around that. But in principle, why wouldn't you have the ability to actually fund, key developments within the park, co-fund it with your key stakeholders, and take some of the pressure off the community? I mean, there's no doubt the community is so committed to our park. They want to help in whatever way they can. So it's behoved upon us to show them the best ways to work within the community to do that. So this is a good way of doing it, if we get it right.
Thank you.
I'm hearing a give a little proposal here.
Councillor Curtin.
Give a lot. Give a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Just back to the point around the money that you have given us. I mean, we we've got specific projects allocated to that money. So we're still holding a little bit of fund, not a lot, but we've redeveloped Peak House. So we spent about 80,000 on that, and we've got a tenant in there, the Hawke's Bay Maori Tourism Trust, who are a newly formed trust with the specific aim of developing tourism projects. So they're underway there. So that's been a great help to us and to them. So hopefully they're successful in their ventures, and many of the track developments that you've contributed to those as well, and that with those funds. So they are well employed. There's no doubt about that.
I mean, the data that we were given, there are 7 specific projects that account for that $500,000. So they were all the money was earmarked
right.
for something specific.
Yeah. So we've accounted for that with you, and we'll go back over that again. But
Well,
clarify that.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I am somewhat confused because clearly the decision to initially fund the park was made by a crusty old council way back in 2016, which has been replaced by a much more
Dynamic, beautiful, handsome.
Same face as Kurt.
Except you went there.
Except me.
So I'm in the dark about, and there was no preparation in this paper before your presentation, and still I haven't seen you propose to this council, ask this council for funding. All I've seen is your trust's priorities enunciated. So the whole thing comes to me as somewhat of a mystery. I think we've got to it in a roundabout way that you are asking us for money to do this thing. And my obvious reply is, to staff will be, where on earth is the priority for this in terms of our environmental direction of travel? I certainly haven't seen it to date, haven't seen any discussion on the whole Tamata thing in regard to the long-term plan. I don't know what that looks like. So I'm in the dark, and the obvious question is, if your community over there, over the river, which is a long way from here, it's about 100 miles.
I thought it was another universe.
It probably is. What's the level of support from Hastings and Havelock ratepayers over in your rohi to fund this, as opposed to asking people on this side to fund it?
So,
let alone Wairoa.
So we're asking specifically for some increase in operational funding. That's what we're asking for. That's what I've asked for here, which is to go from 3 to 5 days of a person who's been employed specifically with skills to working within our park.
So with more money, is that what you're asking?
Dollar figures?
I think we go from 50,000 to.
It's 65,000 now.
So the current budget for annual maintenance, which sits outside of the discussion on the 500,000, is $65,000 a year. So that's contracted through the works group in a negotiated contract with the trust, with the 3-day a week and the specific employee orchestrated around the $65,000 current commitment.
So it's 65,000 a year, in addition to the
The 500k was a one-off payment set aside some years ago.
It was from that reserve fund that you set up.
So this is a different sort of discussion.
So I don't have a context for understanding what the proposal is.
I understand that. Well, I mean, the reason we came here today was we didn't really have a lot of time to prepare. Rex sort of and Tom said, look, you better come and have a bit of discussion about what you're up to, which I think is a really, really great opportunity, and then we can hopefully go away and actually fashion some more detailed, focused requests and presentations. So that's really.
In fairness to these guys, we weren't asking them to come in and make a financial pitch today. We just wanted to get a sense of what's the overall gestalt here of, given the controversy around all of this, where we are presently invested, where is it going, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Very good word, Tom.
Yeah. So sorry, Tom, can I just finish that? So specifically today, so there's 3 to 5 days, and then the track maintenance, up to 30 grand a year. That would be great, but we can form all of that up and discuss that a bit later if need be. But that's specifically what we're focused on from an operational point of view. And then the second thing would be what's the feeling in the room around capital purchases and various other things that are going on.
Councillor Dick.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd agree with Councillor Curtin that then there needs to be a follow-up to this, which effectively is an approach in the first instance through staff, so that staff can bring a paper to us, which is quite specific about the request and what the options are, including the possibility of acquiring this new land, which Mr. Bate, has given a fairly eloquent justification for. So I think that needs to happen, Mr. Chairman. But the other thing I'd suggest is that I don't believe that the issue of the track on the eastern side should be mixed up with whatever proposition you made, because it's not. You didn't do it. You've had little, if any, influence over it. Maybe you should have had more, but I don't think that should be a distraction from a proposal put to the council in the most appropriate way.
Councillor Bailey.
Oh, thank you, Chair. It's been interesting listening to how this discussion's gone on. I really enjoy these, but I totally get Councillor Wilson's point that what's in it for Warrell, what about a park in Warrell? Because, and I totally get Councillor Curtin's point about where does this sit with our core function in terms of maintaining and enhancing the environment and such. And it kind of leads me to I think the important question that we should be asking ourselves is, if we're going to have a figure of bandied around of whatever it is, 1.3 or $1.6 million or anything else like that, is this the right deal for that sort of money? Is that what we're going to get best bang for buck for? Is that what's the lost opportunity cost in case, because there may be something in Warrell, there may be something down in Central Hawke's Bay, there may be something in Napier, who knows? I think if we're going to even consider looking at funding something like this, we should instigate something of a participatory decision-making process with the public, so that they can let us know what they think's the most important thing, instead of having someone walk in here and put their hand out and us going, oh, that sounds like a really good idea, because we don't know everything. And I think that the public, if we're going to look at giving this sort of money away, the public needs to have really good say as to these are our ideas, this is what we want for our communities. And I think we'd be missing a really big opportunity if we were to go along the path of deciding whether or not to accept to do funding for this issue.
Before I go to you, Rex, am I factually accurate that beyond completing our commitment of $100,000 in this year or next year, there is presently no other funding other than, is the 65 carried currently in our budgeting for the long-term plan?
Yep, so the 65,000 is an ongoing commitment, as has been in place for a number of years and extends into the future through the LTP.
So if we did not act affirmatively, we would close out our $500,000 commitment, and that would be it. Okay.
Right.
Rex.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, just Councillor Curtin's benefit, if you concentrate, the 500,000 capital which we gave to Tomato Park was part of the social fund. I think it was 6 million or 5 million in total, and which was distributed out to the various areas. I mean, Wairoa spent it on their swimming pool, Central Hawke's Bay did, 2.5 million went to Napier and they spent it on their museum, and Hastings spent 2 million on the sports park, and 500,000 was given to the park after a lot of advocacy from the trust at the time. So that was that. The monies which we give, and there's been a lot of discussion about this, and Councillor Barker was very strong on this at the time, that we should be doing a lot more and talking to the trust about how we can cooperate in your operational cost, as we do everywhere else And for Councillor Curtin's benefit again, I'm sure we spend quite a bit of money in Ahuriri Estuary as well. So
Not enough.
it's
Well, it's gone now.
It's
Those
gone.
bits are across the thing. 48% of the money raised at Hastings. that's
47.
gone.
It's actually 47%.
All right.
We've got the port though. So we'll keep that in.
So, but before we get into those kind of, so I'd be really keen for us to look at that, and if the trust requires it, and we'd be keen to get deeper involved with the trust. I just want to say that this is a very special asset for our region. My wife drags me up there occasionally. It's like a house of pain for me. But nevertheless, I always, when I'm catching breath, turn and admire just what a phenomenal job has been done here over the years. And I want to acknowledge you, Bruno, you're down at the back there. As the chair, you brought that marvellous presentation to us, which we all thought was the 10-year plan, or that Tom pointed out, that over the years you've done an absolute incredible job, and you represented the trust incredibly well last time. And without your advocacy and going, remember we went to Koyupatiki Marae and we battled it out there, I don't think you would have got that 500 grand. I don't think the trust would have got it without you sitting there and you had one of your sons with you that day. So I just wanted to acknowledge you in that whole process. And in the fact that the trust does look, the park does look so fantastic right now, because it is quite amazing, and the plantings are amazing. And you can just see how people in Hawke's Bay, including people across the river, regard the park because they see it all as one. And you're right there, Mike, they do see it all as one. So they saw the track and they didn't know that who owns the land on the other side. But a section of our community, one section was really upset about the track, another section was really excited about the track. But one thing for sure, everyone was active. Everybody had a point of view. And I was really privileged to go up the top of the park on a wānanga that I went from Pakipak, went up with a busload of tangata whenua, and I learned a lot, because I learned that each hapu sees it differently, sees the peak differently. So it's not the same, the guys from Waimarama, they see it quite differently from the guys on the plains and the guys to the south, the hapus in the south. So that was something I really learned on the day, and picking up Paul's point of view, and I'm really pleased that you are picking that up, that getting a view from mana whenua and tangata whenua is really important, because they have a different lens. And you could see that in the debate. We saw it, or I did, as a track going up the park, up the side of the peak. Friends of mine who are Māori friends, they saw it as a scar across their face. So they have a different lens when they're looking at things like this, and we need to get that perspective and understand that perspective. So, and finally, because it's lunchtime, you're doing a great job. The trustees of the park, fantastic job. It is a fantastic asset for all of us in Hawke's Bay. So thanks.
Peter, you want to close out?
Oh, I thought that was a close.
Yeah. Well, sorry, all but. So look, I think where we've settled up on this is that you're going to come back to us with some form of proposal, and we'll discuss that and debate it. You've heard from the discussion today. We have a lot of priorities as I guess the environmental managers for this district. The park that you're entrusted with caring for is very important to that. So we're the right people for you to come and make a proposal to. But just in making that proposal, Michael, you talked about why that piece of land is important, but the reasons you gave were negative reasons. They were, we don't want X and Y to happen on it. There's got to be positive reasons as well, and you've got to be very clear in your minds as to how that's going to fit into the broader vision that you carry for the area that you're responsible for, and that you communicate that effectively to us. That's very important.
Unless you have any final comment, we'll close this off and
No, just thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present.
Cool, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, and the guidance. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No worries.
Right, Chair, what's next?
Lunch. What are you talking about?
All right, thank you. I'm waiting for him to say the words.
I'm sick of your union.
No, it was lunchtime.
On all night.
No, I shut up.
Not important to us at all.